Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Over the past month or two, a lot of news surrounding the production of Season 2 of the One Piece live action has been circulating across the internet, but I just didn't feel right about making a whole video breaking down one small piece of news. That said, a lot of people in my comments wanted me to cover these topics since not everyone in my audience occupies the same parts of the fandom where this information is being discussed. So if you end up liking this style of video, let me know in the comments if you'd want me to keep up this kind of live action news coverage. And with that, in this video, I'll be going through all of the casting information we have for 8 new characters that will formally debut in Season 2, along with some interesting production photos that give us a hint at the future for characters that we may see, plus I'll address this unconfirmed report that Season 3 is also on the way. If you're new to the channel, I do weekly manga breakdowns as well as coverage of the live action, so if you end up enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Also, a brief spoiler warning ahead for the Alabasta saga. If you're not caught up to chapter 217 in the manga or around episode 135 in the anime, then you may want to click out of this video to preserve your experience with the series. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So as general news, this season is being worked on under the codename Project Renaissance, a reference to the art movement that came before the Baroque period that is the namesake of Baroque Works, our criminal organization for this season. Now, according to Production Weekly's issue 1393, the second season was slated to resume filming in South Africa, as well as potentially Spain and Mexico, with production picking back up in mid-June of this year. That is to say, filming is not yet underway, so if you've seen any other videos or social media accounts or reports saying otherwise, best not trust those sources. Our first bit of news comes from the independent Netflix news site What's on Netflix, who disclosed earlier in May the age ranges and ethnicities listed on casting descriptions for a handful of characters. There will be a link to this article in the description, but do note that the only things being reported here are the age and ethnicity information from the castings. The little blurb you see associated with them looks to be purely editorial from the website itself. Aside from Crocus, all of the following characters are apparently listed as recurring characters, which generally just means that they will be appearing in more than one episode. Starting off with Vivi, it seems they are looking for an actress around 17 to 20 years old who is Middle Eastern, North African, or South Asian. And this makes a lot of sense, given that the Kingdom of Alabasta is heavily inspired by Egyptian imagery and Middle Eastern architecture, as well as her name Nefertari being directly inspired from Egyptian royalty as well. And that's probably the inspiration that most fans know Alabasta from. However, it should be noted that this kingdom was actually the result of a mix of influences, including India, as stated in the travel guide Rurubu One Piece. The Palace of Alubarna bears some striking resemblance to the Taj Mahal, while the elevated fort the capital rests upon is seemingly inspired by the Mehrangarh Fort in Rajasthan. The world and characters of One Piece were inspired by a range of real-life cultures, and we see that on display once again with the casting details from Miss All Sunday, better known as Nico Robin. It seems they are looking for a Hispanic or Latina actress in their 20s or 30s for this role. Keep in mind, actors often play above or below their actual age when portraying characters. For example, Emily Rudd is 31 but plays an 18-year-old Nami on the show, and as such, an actor's actual age is less important than the age that they can present for the series. Now, there has been a lot of discussion about the decision to go with a Hispanic or Latina actress for Robin, and before we get into it, if you're interested in contributing to these conversations in the comments, please do be respectful and level-headed with your words. That said, I've seen a lot of people angry at this decision for whatever reason, but I think a lot of that frustration may come from a place of misinformation or misunderstanding. People often cite the Volume 56 SBS, where Oda was asked about where the Straw Hats would be from if they existed in our real world, and they like to pass this off as some official declaration of their ethnicities. The truth is, our notion of race or ethnicity in our world does not map onto the world of One Piece. The places that were assigned to them are admittedly based on places that would fit the characters' images and were motivated by Oda's perspective on certain stereotypes, for better or for worse. Of course, you have specific countries listed for most of them, but then you have the entire continent of Africa listed for Usopp. For all intents and purposes, these are places that are associated with the feel of the character, their image, their vibe, for lack of a better word. And for Robin in particular, given her history as an assassin and Baroque Works agent, I suppose she is somewhat associated with the femme fatale archetype or the sexy spy trope that would have been popular in the media during Oda's time. But none of this is defined by someone's ethnicity, nor nationality for that matter, and that's really what this SBS speaks on, nationality more than ethnicity. But the reality is, this show has never used the SBS for purposes of casting to the extent that people believe. Out of all of the Straw Hats introduced in Season 1, the only one who corresponds with what was listed in that SBS is Zoro, whose actor is Japanese. Luffy's actor is not from Brazil, Nami's actress is not from Sweden, Usopp's actor is not from Africa, and Sanji's actor is not from France. If you're angry about this casting, you should have been angry about the other Straw Hats as well, and maybe you were, but hey. And I think what this may boil down to is the issue some people may have with Robin not being white. And this is a trickier discussion. If you're not aware, before a certain turning point in the series, Robin had always been depicted with a darker complexion in the anime, but after that point was redesigned to have a lighter complexion reflecting her depiction in the manga. And I won't really get into the specifics of why this was the case, or the potential in-universe reasonings for why this change in complexion might have occurred, as that could be a whole nother video in itself, but I think the reality is, most fans of One Piece have known Robin from her initial design in the anime. As much as I love the manga, this adaptation draws from various source materials, not just the original iteration, and I think it does make some sense to try and adhere to the most iconic rendition of that character. But all of that aside, one of the most tangible connections for Robin being played by a Latina or Hispanic actress is that her set of abilities is often named using Spanish, usually featuring a number or body part. Of course, this tends to precede the French word for flower, once again speaking to how Oda draws from a range of influences for his designs. All in all, I think the point is to trust in the casting department, as they've done a great job so far with bringing these characters that we all know and love to life. People in our world come from all sorts of backgrounds, and ultimately, what will end up mattering is how they play the character. We also had some details for Smoker, who was looking to be a white actor between the ages of 25 and 35. Now, we did get a brief glimpse at Smoker as a child at the start of episode 1, as well as at the end of the season where he was played by the actor who played Korobi, but as we had speculated, this was just a stand-in for the character. And while on the topic, there were some allegedly leaked audition scripts for this character floating around the internet. They were first brought to my attention by the good people of the One Piece live action Discord server, and there were some interesting bits of dialogue in there suggesting that the potential appearance of another character in the series was possible. But in truth, audition scripts are not necessarily the same thing as the final scripts that make their way into the series. Maybe I'll talk about this in depth when we get closer to the release of season 2, but for now, I don't want to necessarily cover this sort of leak in detail. For Tashigi, they are looking for an Asian actress in her 20s. This of course would set them to be around the age of Makenyu, Zoro's actor, and given their relationship across the series as rivals and Tashigi's eerie similarity to Kuina, this casting does make a lot of sense as well. There's been a lot of speculation over the years for why these characters seemingly look so much alike, and there are some great theories out there, especially in recent years with more knowledge surrounding Shimotsuki Village coming to light, but I won't dive into that in this video for the sake of spoilers. We also have a few more Baroque Works agents, with Miss Valentine being played by a white actress in her 20s, and Mr. 5 being played by a black actor in his 20s as well. Personally, I'm thrilled to see these two characters included in this season, as some people were worried that they may have their roles cut or reduced, since they are probably some of the least relevant Baroque Works agents in the series at large. That said, they are a pretty big antagonistic force across Whiskey Peak and Little Garden, so I look forward to these story arcs playing out in some shape or form. We've slowly been getting confirmation that Little Garden is happening, and I think this may be some more hope that we are indeed getting Whiskey Peak, or at least some rendition of it. In fact, toward the end of the video, I'll go into a bit more speculation on what the structure of this season may be, given what we know now. And the last character in this batch is of course Crocus, who's played by an older man in his late 60s or 70s of any ethnicity. As mentioned earlier, Crocus is not listed as a recurring character, meaning he'll likely only be in a single episode when the crew visits the Twin Cape after traversing Reverse Mountain. A few weeks later, we also got the casting description for Miss Goldenweek, who is looking to be portrayed by an actress who is at least 18 years old, of any ethnicity, who can play a young to late teenager. But on top of this, we also got the character description for her as well, which reads, "A deadpan Wednesday Addams type. Don't be fooled by her youthful appearance and childlike demeanor. She's a twisted killer with supernatural powers of persuasion who can make her victims obey her every sadistic whim. Instead of making friends, she finds it easier to make people into playthings, turning them into living dolls at her tea party of horrors. Even our protagonist, a stalwart optimist with unshakable dreams, finds his will sapped in her presence. When our heroes find a way to turn the tables on her, she'll pay the price with a taste of her own depraved medicine. Seeking 18 plus to play young to late teens. Recurring guest star." From this, it seems like they're taking Miss Goldenweek in a very interesting direction. They mentioned that she will maintain her deadpan delivery, and while this often was used for more comedic purposes in the source material, it seems it'll be given a darker sort of bend. It really feels like they're playing into her role as an assassin, which she is supposed to be, but due to her portrayal in the Little Garden arc, she came off as more of Mr. 3's strange, quiet sidekick, and I for one welcome this change to make her more of a presence in the series. In the source material, she used a form of hypnotism referred to as color straps, allowing her to control someone's actions with her colored paint. The live action seems to be elaborating on this by having her use her abilities to force our heroes into a twisted tea party. Now this is rather fun, as both she and her partner Mr. 3 enjoy their fair share of tea. Also, this idea of turning people into living dolls is very reminiscent of Mr. 3's extra special candelabra being used to turn some of the crew into wax figurines, and if I were to guess, this tea party may be what replaces the candelabra altogether. Instead of allocating all of these resources to recreate this giant set piece, they could play up the horror aspect of becoming a mindless doll with Miss Goldenweek's power set on full display. I'm sure Mr. 3's abilities will still come into play somehow, perhaps to subdue the giants, but I am excited at this refreshing twist on the Little Garden arc. Part of what makes the live action so fun for me is that it's not just retelling the same story beat for beat, and instead iterating on things we've seen before and creating something new and exciting. One last thing that is somewhat telling is that this character is listed as a recurring guest star, suggesting that she will be in at least 2 episodes. The most straightforward interpretation of this would be that the Little Garden arc itself will span more than a single episode, which is certainly possible. However, there are opportunities for her to appear outside of the context of Little Garden as well. Much like how Buggy was teased at the end of episode 1, Mr. 3 and Miss Goldenweek could be teased in an earlier episode. Perhaps after Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine are initially thwarted in the adaptation of Whiskey Peak, the episode could end with an adaptation of Mr. 3 and Miss Goldenweek's introductory scene at Vacation Island, where they receive the orders to carry out the mission. We know this place does exist in the world of the live action, as we actually saw it in a painting on the walls of the Baratier in season 1. We also tend to revisit various characters from across the series in between sagas in the source material, but such an occasion never really arises after Alabasta. As such, there may be some motivation to include this kind of sequence at the end of Season 2, and it's there that we could find Miss Goldenweek after Baroqueworks' defeat on Little Garden. In the source material, she's the only one to not have lost in combat, and instead is last seen by Karoo as she sneaks away into the forest. Brief spoilers ahead for a future cover story that takes place during the Water 7 arc, so if you don't wish to be spoiled, click ahead to the next section of the video. Alright, in the Baroqueworks cover story, we find her still hiding out on Little Garden alongside Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, and it's here that they learn about the fall of Baroqueworks. From there, they decide to help break the rest of their colleagues out of prison, and this portion of the cover story could be adapted at the end of the season, suggesting to the informed viewer that the rest of it will be happening off-screen. In fact, at the end of Alabasta, Hina could even mention needing to go to Vacation Island, which would set up her appearance there later on in the cover story. There's a lot of fun potential here, and I'm excited to see what they end up doing. Some additional bits of news looks to be a couple photos of ships being built at Cape Town Film Studios. The first 2 depict the Going Merry tilted upwards at an angle, suggesting to many that this is in preparation for the episode when the Straw Hats sail up Reverse Mountain. The more interesting photo, however, is that of a particular ship that may be familiar to some fans. The rest of this section of the video will be talking about the ship and its significance in more detail, and will in fact include spoilers for the Thriller Bark arc, so if you have not made it that far into the series just yet and don't wish to be spoiled, I recommend skipping ahead to the next section, or if you want to click out of the video, I appreciate you watching this far. Alright, now the ship in question here looks to be the one used by the Rumbar Pirates. This was the crew that befriended a young Laboon before leaving him with Crocus at the Twin Capes, promising to return once they had traveled the world. We first saw this crew back during the Reverse Mountain arc, but at the time, they were unnamed, and it wasn't until the Thriller Bark arc that we learned this crew was actually the old crew that Brooke belonged to before tragedy struck him and their captain with the rest of their men. Now, this is another fantastic instance of hindsight allowing for some really fun adaptation of the source material. The ship and the pirates were initially confined to just a few brief panels of Crocus explaining Laboon's origin, but since we have gained the greater context of who these pirates actually were, it allows the series to show more of the flashback. So, what does this all mean? Well, it feels like they're taking some more time here to set up Brooke eventually joining as a crewmate. In the source material, Laboon's presence and the Reverse Mountain arc as a whole is fairly forgettable and relatively insignificant until you get to the big reveal in Thriller Bark. By showing the flashback that we get during that arc here, it really heightens Laboon's significance and better sows the seed for Brooke down the line. And in fact, we could actually even see Brooke as early as Season 2 here with this flashback. They could cast someone to portray him when he was alive, which would allow them the freedom of not necessarily committing to anyone down the line. Even if we don't see him in full, perhaps just a shot from behind with his afro in full glory would be enough. I also have some expectation that we'll see someone playing Captain Yorkie and the rest of the Rumbar Pirates as well. Either way, taking the time and effort to recreate the Rumbar Pirates ship suggests to me that they're really in it for the long haul. Laboon's origin could have easily been hand-waved with a few simple lines of dialogue from Crocus, but instead, they seem to be going all out. This does give me hope for their plans to pursue as many seasons as possible and to make each season as fleshed out as they can. Now, between what was just discussed with the implications of that production photo and how much we could see in Little Garden from the Miss Goldenweek casting details, some part of me wonders just how much time we'll be spending on the arcs leading up to Alabasta. My initial guess way back when for what this season could look like was something like one episode in Logetown, one episode sort of conflating the events of Reverse Mountain and Whiskey Peak, one episode on Little Garden, 2 episodes on Drum, and 3 in Alabasta. This is all, of course, with the assumption that there's only 8 episodes in this season, but since then, we've had some reason to speculate that there may be more than 8. However, the casting description for Miss Goldenweek did in fact include indication that this was an 8-episode production. Now, of course, this does not necessarily mean anything for certain, but it is definitely interesting to note. Also, recently, the actor who portrayed Patty in Season 1, Brashad Mayweather, was interviewed by What's Poppin' with Bruce Crossie. The link to the full video will be in the description, but in it he said,
"So I really felt that role would be me. And hopefully, there's a flashback scene with Patty. We'll see if they flash back to it because they're filming 2 seasons, Season 2 and 3, back to back starting soon. So we'll see what happens."
This is the first we've heard of a Season 3 in the plans, and many outlets ran with this information as something substantial. Unfortunately, this statement was later walked back, and it turns out he was, quote, only speculating in that interview. Though, it is a very odd thing to say as speculation, especially if you are not part of the production for this second season to begin with. I do doubt that a Season 3 is in the works in addition to a Season 2, especially since the 3rd season has not yet been registered. However, I am wondering if the slip up here is indicative of something else. As we know, Netflix is very fond of the model where they release a given season of television in multiple parts over the course of a year or so. This sort of release schedule is something that fans have been long speculating for One Piece, and given everything so far, I think it may be possible here. Perhaps we can speculate that Brashad's accidental slip-up is not actually in regards to a 3rd season, but rather the idea that the 2 parts of Season 2 are what's being filmed back-to-back. This may allow them to spend a bit more time on the first half of the season than they normally would, giving them the opportunity to really flesh out certain scenes like the one I mentioned in the previous section. This may also work to explain why we've only gotten casting details regarding the specific group of pre-Alabasta characters here. Of course, that may not really be relevant or anything to look into closely, since we know Chopper is likely on the way as well. Either way, I am excited at the potential for having a 2-part season. Not only would it allow the creators of the show more time to tell their story, but it also keeps the conversation around the series going. In today's age of media, hype cycles come and go, especially for something like a streaming series that puts out all of its episodes in one single drop. Netflix doesn't really do the weekly release model, so a split season release is the next best thing we have. Also, it shortens the downtime between releases, meaning that we may not have to wait as long for Season 3 as we did for Season 2, since the creators of the show can work on the next season while we as fans look forward to the second half of the second season. And as someone who makes in-depth breakdowns of the live-action series, it would definitely allow me the chance to really examine each episode with a close eye. I may be a little biased here in that regard, but I'd love to know what you all think of this. Are you interested in a 2-part season, and how do you feel about the casting information that we've gotten so far? Remember, I'd appreciate it if you kept your comments civil, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can get more updates on the live action as they come out. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.